Good morning, class. Today we are finishing up our chapter 7 in social studies. So we're finishing up the reading and working on our poster. So getting those juices flowing, thinking about what we want. Yes, Kim? Oh, we haven't done the comprehension page yet. Okay, so let's do another quick review of our key terms. What do we know about the steamboat? Ryan O?
Was a boat that ran on steam.
Yeah, what else did we learn? What else did we learn about the steamboat? It had a steam engine. And what else, Paul?
You could with the land, they used to get for transportation.
Yeah, it was the main type of transportation to get to Minnesota. We know that there were other forms of transportation also. It wasn't just the steamboat. Steamboat only worked spring, summer, and fall. They couldn't use the steamboat in the winter because of the ice. What did they use? What other modes of transportation did they use, Andrea?
You could use like a horse, like a carriage, but that'd be like very hard. It wasn't hard, but it took 6 days rather than 2 days. And there was like always a chance that you could freeze to death because a blizzard hit you and you were not prepared.
Yep. So the stagecoach would take 6 days. It took longer than the steamboat going from Illinois to Minnesota. Steamboat only took 2 days, and you had to be careful because if a winter storm hit, you had to be able to find shelter to protect yourself if you were on that stagecoach. What other modes of transportation, Molly?
Were trains around?
Trains were not around yet. Josie?
The
ox cart. So the people that were up in northern Minnesota would do the ox cart, bringing it down to Fort Snelling. That would take 30 days. So we had the ox cart, we had the steamboat, we had the stagecoach. They still had canoes. Remember how the voyagers would take the canoes in Minnesota, so you could still do canoes. They could walk places. I think there's one more. We'll have to see if we read about it. All right, U.S. Congress. What can you tell me about the U.S. Congress? Oh my, we are tired on this Monday morning. Paul?
The U.S. Congress is a group of people who make laws that get elected and put into the House of Representatives.
Yeah, the U.S. Congress is part of the legislature. Legislator makes the laws. They're elected officials, and they're divided into two groups. There's the Senate, and then there's the House of Representatives. What can you tell me about the governor? Molly?
The head of the executive branch of a state or territory.
The head of the executive branch. So the legislative branch makes the laws. That's the Congress. Executive branch, they enforce the laws. And the head of the executive branch in the state is the governor, who is the head of the executive branch for the whole country. Peyton?
The U.S. president.
The president. President is the head of the executive branch. What does the executive branch do? Enforces the laws. Legislative passes the laws. They create the laws. The executive enforces the laws. What's the third branch of government, Andrea?
It's the judicial branch, and it's the head of it is the Supreme Court, and
Molly?
they enforce the laws.
No, executive enforces.
They
interpret the laws. So we have the legislative branch. They create the laws. They make the laws. Executive branch enforces the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. Those are the courts, the Supreme Court. They're telling us if we're following the law, if we're breaking the law. Who can tell us about the states? Ryan T.
A geographic area with boundaries, residents, and a government with a constitution and laws.
It's a geographic area, it has boundaries, so we know where one state starts, another state stops. The residents live there, and they have their own constitution. Remember, there's the individual state constitutions, and then there's the whole United States Constitution. That's the federal law. Who can tell us about immigrants? Paul? Yeah, they move from another country to live in the new country, not just to visit. Immigrants are people who are coming in from another country to live in the new country. Recruiter. What does the recruiter do? Ryan?
Someone who encourages new people to join a group or take action.
Yeah, encourages people to join a new group or take action. Recruiters from Minnesota were encouraging people to move to Minnesota, saying what an amazing state we have. That's what we're working on with our project this week. Remember, that project is due on Friday, the same day as our test. So you're doing your own recruiting project. It's a poster, it's a brochure, or it could be a guidebook. You can do it on the computer, but you want to make it look like it's from the 1850s. If you want paper to write it on, we have paper, but you want to try to make it look like it's old time from the 1850s. Constitution. Who can tell me about the Constitution? Go ahead, Brian.
A written document outlining how the government of a state or a country is organized.
Yep, it's the written document that says how the state or the country is going to run. And federalism. Julian?
A system of government in which power is divided between the federal and national government and various state governments.
It's a system of government where we have power with the whole country, the federal government, and we have power with the states. So some laws are for the entire country, some laws just go by the state. So we split power between the federal and the states. All right, let's do our last bit of reading for this chapter. We are on page 136. A community grows, page 136. Matson began, remember Matson was the immigrant from Sweden that we had read about last week. Matson began writing a series of letters that appeared in Hemlandet, the Homeland, a Swedish language newspaper published in Chicago. The letters described life in Minnesota and urged other Swedes to come. Many did just that. In the summer of 1855, the growing group of Swedes who lived in Matson's settlement officially formed the township of Vasa. The Swedes weren't the only immigrants arriving in Minnesota at this time. Hans Matson recalled what it was like. While the Swedes were pouring into our place, our friends, the Norwegians, had started a prosperous settlement a few miles to the south, many of them coming overland from Wisconsin, bringing cattle, implements, and other valuables of which the Swedes, being mostly poor newcomers, were destitute. Many immigrants of both nationalities came as deck passengers on the Mississippi steamboats to Red Wing. Thousands of new settlers arrived in Minnesota each year seeking a better life. Many of the Norwegians had left Norway because land and jobs were scarce there. Families from southern Ireland had come to escape the terrible famines that left people starving in their homeland. The biggest immigrant group coming during the 1850s was the Germans, many of whom had fled wars back home. Newcomers from New England and other parts of the East continued to arrive too. So a lot of the immigrants are leaving their home countries because there's no food. The famine is there, especially in Ireland. It was the Great Potato Famine. They're leaving Norway and Sweden because they can't afford to get the land there. Only the rich people have the land, so they come over here and they're able to have land. Germany, they're escaping all the wars that were happening over there. So people are leaving their home countries because they want a better life. So there's different things about the better life that they're coming for, but that's the basic reason, is they're trying to get a better life. Boatload after boatload of immigrants landed in the towns along the rivers and spread out into the country beyond. Soon there were whole communities where people continued to speak their native languages and few spoke English. The names of some of these places were told. Some of these places told where people had come from. Besides Vasa, there were New Ulm, New Prague, St. Patrick, Scandia, Heidelberg, and many other names that call to mind homelands far away. Before long, Minnesota was not only the New England of the West, but also the New Sweden, the New Norway, and the New Germany. Look down at the requirements for becoming a state. In 1856, a group of Minnesotans decided they were ready for statehood. They petitioned or formally requested that Congress admit Minnesota as a state. So remember, we talked about it for the territory. Now we're going to see what needed to happen for us to become an actual state. Congress must pass a law allowing the territory to proceed toward becoming a state. In 1857, Congress passed a law allowing Minnesota to begin the process of achieving statehood. A group of residents must write the state constitution. Minnesota's constitution was approved at a meeting in St. Paul in 1857. Voters must approve the Constitution and elect government officials. Minnesotans approved the Constitution by a vote of 30,055 to 571. So an overwhelming majority said, yes, we want this Constitution. They elected Henry Sibley as the first state governor. Who was the first territory governor? Alexander Ramsey. He was the territory governor. So Henry Sibley is the first state governor. So don't be confused by that, because we know Ramsey was the first governor, but that's when it was a territory. Now becoming a state, it's Henry Sibley. Congress must pass a law admitting the state into the Union. Congress admitted Minnesota into the Union as the 32nd state on May 11, 1858. Statehood for Minnesota. With its population exploding, Minnesotans launched a drive for statehood. There were many advantages to being a state rather than a territory. States are more independent than territories because the federal government has less control over states than it does over territories. As a state, Minnesota would be able to control its own finances and create its own budget. It would have more independence to deal with private companies such as the railroad companies that were laying tracks to the west. So when somebody asked if railroads were a form of transportation, they were just starting to come. So they were laying down tracks. So we didn't actually have the railroads coming through yet, but we were getting ready for those railroads. It would also have more representatives in the U.S. Congress and therefore more influence in national affairs. Before Minnesota could become a state, however, it needed a constitution that set the rules for how the state government would operate. In the summer of 1857, more than 100 delegates from around the territory gathered in St. Paul for a constitutional convention. The meeting did not go well. It quickly broke into two separate conventions, one for each of the two major political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. Each convention produced its own constitution and refused to accept the other side's version. Surprise, surprise. We have conflict between Democrats and Republicans today. They had it 150 years ago. It's been an ongoing issue. The Republicans and the Democrats both want the government to lead in different ways. So they're going to see things from different perspectives, and they need to work together to come up with a common grounds that they both will agree on. Not easy. For a while, it looked like the drive for statehood would fail. Finally, after more than a month of arguing, the two parties resolved their differences and agreed to a single document. Minnesota voters approved the new Constitution in October 1857. On May 11, 1858, the U.S. Congress passed a law making Minnesota the 32nd state in the Union. In a speech to the legislature, the state's first governor, Henry Sibley, described Minnesota as the newest member of the American family. She extends a friendly hand to all her sisters, north and south, and gives them assurance that she joins their ranks, not to provoke sectional discord or to engender strife, but to promote harmony and goodwill, and to lend her aid on all occasions in maintaining the integrity of the Union. Sibley and most other Minnesotans feared that the family they had just joined was about to break apart. They were correct. The Civil War would erupt in 1861 and last 4 long years. So it becomes a state in 1858, and just 3 years later, there's the big Civil War, not knowing what's going to happen to our country. So that we're going to learn about in our next chapter. Same name, different powers. Does this book sometimes remind you of studying American history last year? Most likely you remember learning about the U.S. Constitution. It is, after all, one of the most famous legal documents in the world. The U.S. Constitution explains how our national government is set up. The Constitution is important because it influences what government is allowed to do and not do throughout the United States. Even though the U.S. Constitution gets most of its attention, each state has its own constitution too. Minnesota's constitution also describes a government's powers. Unlike the U.S. one, though, ours only applies to our state. Political parties argued about creating Minnesota's constitution. They knew it would have an effect on life in the state well into the future. Yes, this document affects your life today. Imagine not having state boundaries. How would you know when you're here and when you're in Wisconsin? Then and now, every law passed in Minnesota must follow the rules set up in the state constitution. The Constitution Minnesota's approved in October of 1857 set up the state's government. Among other things, now this is important, this is how our state runs. It set the state's boundaries. It granted the right to vote to the free white male citizens. Later changes gave voting rights to African Americans, women, American Indians, and other people. But remember, way back in time, it was the white men who made all of the decisions. Thank goodness people realize that everybody has a good brain in their heads and can make decisions. It divided state power among 3 branches: the legislative, headed by the state legislature consisting of a House of Representatives and a Senate; the executive, headed by a governor; and the judicial, headed by the state Supreme Court. Understanding federalism. Federalism, or a federal system of government, is one in which power is divided so that one level has complete control. Certain powers, like the power to declare war on another country, are held by the national government. Many other powers, such as how schools are funded, belong to state governments. States allow local governments to oversee laws that affect smaller regions and communities. In the United States, the federal government controls territories. States occupy their own level. This means a state has much more control over its affairs than a territory does. The power held by states was appealing to leaders who wanted Minnesota to become a state so we could have our own constitution. So you can see in that triangle kind of how the power trickles down. So you've got the federal government, then you have the state government, and then you have the individual counties, townships, cities. Okay, we live, I don't know what county Brooklyn Park is in. Is it Hennepin County? Because I live in Coon Rapids, which is in Anoka County. So counties kind of have their own rules that they follow. Your individual cities have their own rules, like when can you park on the street in the wintertime because of snow plowing? Can you park overnight? Can you not park? Do you have to switch to opposite sides of the street on different days? So the individual cities have rules. Then the counties have rules. Then we have our government. The whole state has their rules. And then we all have to follow the different federal rules for the country. So with that, we are done. We read the next section past Friday, getting us thinking about our recruitment, filling in those notes for our recruitment poster. So we should have all of our notes done. And we should be ready to start mapping out our poster or brochure or guidebook, whichever one you're making. If you're doing it online, I saw some of us found some really cool backgrounds that look like old-time paper. So that was very cool. So remember, try to make it look like it's old. Okay, they didn't use stark white fancy prints. They used like the old-timey looking font. So make sure you're following what it says on the bottom of our investigation sheet. You need to have actual historical details and facts, including reasons given by recruiters and immigrants for moving to Minnesota. So when we filled in those notes on the top of the paper, use some of those in your poster. Do you have to use every single one? No, that would be way too much information packed in there. But you should put reasons why you should come to Minnesota that actual people gave. Include maps, sketches, poems, songs, or other visuals to make your recruiting tool appealing to prospective immigrants. We have a whole week to work on this project. I expect you to put effort and energy into this. Correct spelling. Make it look appealing. Make people want to come to Minnesota. This is not just a one day, let's slap something on the paper and call it done. Okay, you have a lot of time, make it count. And you want it to look as authentic as possible. So if you are at home, it is due on Friday. If you are coming back to school next week, Monday, you have it printed out, or you have something that you're doing on paper, just bring it with you when you come back next week. Tomorrow, our social studies class is going to be working on this project because we can work with a partner if we want, or you can work individually. So with that, we're going to say goodbye to our friends at home and hope you are feeling well, and we see you soon.